Welcome, everyone. We're just letting people filter in. Welcome, welcome. Awesome. Great to see so many people coming in.
I think we should do a warning, Nate. Hi, everybody. If anyone here, anyone that is attending this seminar is pregnant or has a heart condition, we're going to need you to sign a waiver because the information you're about to receive is going to be so exciting it could cause problems.
Never short on confidence, Mr. Paul Erickson. Awesome. Well, we have a fair amount of people, but let's give it another minute or two because I saw some other folks still filtering in, and then we'll get started. Probably another 30 seconds. And then we have a chat. So please feel free to use the chat function. And then we're also going to have Q&A at the end. And we have a few more people coming in. Um, yeah, we'll have Q&A at the end, and then we'll have the opportunity for really specific questions for people to go ahead and just reach out to us because there's always nuance. Paul and I have done several of these and realize, we're trying to convey information that is applicable to everyone, but not everyone's situation is going to be, the same. Awesome. All right.
Let me just say this, Nate. There are no dumb questions. The only people that can sound really stupid on this is Nate and I. So just remember that whatever it is that you were confused by, we're gonna have a lot of fun in the next hour, and we're gonna really teach you a way to look at your business that I probably believe you've never heard before. So we anticipate questions. Please do not hesitate. And can I make Nate one last point before we get going?
Please.
I'd like everyone to wish my daughter Eve happy birthday. It's her 28th birthday today.
Happy birthday, Eve. That means there's a good meal coming up.
There you go.
Well, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time. If you're in the start of your afternoon on the East Coast or still closing out the morning here on the West Coast, thank you. We know your time is precious. We know you have 1,000 things to do, which is also something that we're going to be talking about later in the next hour. One quick note, we are recording this and we will send this out. And so that will be part of the deal as well. And I think I want to really set this up as the reason why we labeled this as cash flow rescue is we consistently and Management One has worked with thousands of retailers over 30 years, and we just consistently see very similar problems happening, time and again. And we think that we've distilled it down to sort of the core principles that Paul and I are going to be working through to address them, to take action on them, and to make progress. And it really gets back to the why of even Management One exists and why we all as a team get up and try to help retailers. We have a view at Management One that independent retail, specialty retail is an important, really vital piece of the fabric of communities, of the economy. And so many retailers have a passion for what they do, have a passion for their community, for their teams, and yet they are on this treadmill, and they are finding it so challenging to make it a financially sustainable venture. And so we want to get people out of that. We're really passionate about that. That's what drives us. And so the title of this, How to Make Sure You're Making Money and Making Sure It's Not Paper Profits. That is one of the core key concepts because, and Paul, I don't want to give too much away, Paul, but some of the systems that everyone is looking at are misleading you and leading to incorrect decisions, and it's leading to a lot of burnout. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. That's what we want to make sure that we're putting fun back in retail. And I think by generating cash flow, that's how we're going to be doing it. So Paul, why don't you
We
lead
got
us
a
into
poll, don't
this?
we, Nate?
Oh,
I
we
think we
do.
have
We
a poll
do.
to get started. And so I
Fantastic.
think the poll is is that how many of you are feeling a cash flow crunch right now? The answers are I wish all my exams in college were this easy. Are yes, no, or not sure. It fluctuates. So if you would like to participate in the poll, please go ahead and put in your numbers. I think Nate review these at the end of the presentation. So let's
Exactly.
get that
It'll be
done.
it'll be a good litmus test of how everyone is feeling.
There you go.
This is the easiest question because no one gets to see your answer.
That's right. So you can be
So
totally
don't
honest
know
with this.
exactly.
So, there's a lot of, while everyone's doing this, Nate, there's a lot of, I've attended a lot of how to improve your cash flow workshops over the years. And I always find them sort of unfulfilling in the respect that it comes at it from an accounting perspective. It revolves around from an accountant's perspective is the way to improve your cash flow is you need to cut your expenses, which for most retailers is your payroll. So you have to start making less money, and that's going to improve your cash flow. Or you need to increase your margins. Now, I don't know about everybody on this call, but almost every vertical that we work with, Nate, as you know, in retail, there's not a lot of room around improving your margins. I mean,
Yeah,
you've got
it's really
price transparency, right?
groundbreaking stuff.
Yeah, you've
Groundbreaking
got
stuff.
competition, you've got price transparency online. So, what they're really doing is trying to help you around the margins. And what I really believe is they never deal with the true problem. And that's what we're going to talk about over the next 45 to 50 minutes. So, with that
Exactly.
said, let's close the well, we do have 15% that don't have cash flow problems, but I hope you'll still learn something from this presentation anyway today. So, and I know this is going to work here. There we go.
There we go.
All right. Um, the true problem, I think, is that the vast majority of retailers that we encounter, and you have to remember at Management One, we help family businesses. We're not dealing with the major chains. We're not dealing with corporate America. We're dealing with family retail stores that have either one or as many as maybe 10, 15 locations. And it doesn't matter whether you're a family business doing 500,000 or 50 million, believe it or not, it's the same. Most of these retailers have no coherent plan to how much they should be buying in inventory, and then how much inventory should they be carrying in their store. And when you consider that for most retailers, 50% or more is the cash that they are spending on inventory, looking to improve your cash flow anywhere else is sort of a fool's errand. And so that's what we're going to be really talking about today is inventory, which is the absolute heart of a retail store. And you know, for most retailers that we get as clients, Nate, we find that the inventory is all Katie Wampus with new clients. In other words, what am I saying? They have balance problems. They have too much over there and not enough of what they really are selling, and they're sitting with old inventory. The inventory is old. We're going to define why that is a cancer in your store, which is causing not only just poor turn and cash flow problems, but it is absolutely become an inhibitor of sales. And we're going to talk about that also because the customer is motivated to buy essentially two things in any retail store: what's new, what just came in, and what's on sale. And if your business has a lack of both of those, you're going to have cash flow problems. So Nate
And
talked
I think
about this at the
Paul,
beginning. Go
yeah,
ahead, Nate.
just even on that, I think, why does that exist? Why does that happen? It's also true that we see so many of our retailers solving for today and not thinking about where they want to end up at the end of the season, where do they want to begin the next season. Their processes are so short term, because there's so many things going on. That's one of the root causes that causes that dynamic to exist.
Nate, one time I told a retailer to try to explain what merchandise planning is and how you improve your cash flow, you have to look at what the majors do. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have one of the largest malls, of course, in the world at Mall of America in Bloomington, Minnesota. If you walk through Mall of America and go by all of the chain stores, and you whatever day of the month and year it is, 6 months earlier, someone at corporate headquarters was plotting out and planning how many shirts should be in that store on that day, on that month. Somebody was plotting out how many belts, how many skis, how it doesn't matter what type of vertical you're in. If those inventory positions for major stores don't just happen, those are planned out well in advance, and that's how major retailers become successful and have good cash flow. But one of the things that I want to
Exactly.
talk about is accounting, and I don't want to pick on accountants. I do play one on TV occasionally, so they're wonderful people. But retail is unique, and CPAs are generally not well schooled in retail. And so when they encounter retail business, they sometimes create financial statements that I've looked at, and I look at, and Nate, as you know, I probably look at a half a dozen financial statements of independent retailers every single day. And one of the things that we find is that there are holes in GAAP accounting principles that give the retailer an inadequate and somewhat imperfect view of their fiscal health. And so,
Yeah.
what do I mean by that? Go ahead, Nate.
Oh, I was going to say, I think the next slide sums it up, hits
Yeah,
that home.
yeah. I mean, cost of goods sold. What could be a more important metric for accountants to give you on your financial statements than your cost of goods sold? And the one thing that we find is that cost of goods sold can very well be the most misleading metric in retail accounting. And the reason why it's such a problem is that if you don't understand this, you could very well be paying taxes on what people on Wall Street I was reading an article in the last year. We were talking about mythical profits in retail, but you could literally being paid paying taxes on inventory not sold at the end of the year. And let me explain exactly how that happens. And again, this is why I'm not an accountant, but I play one on TV. Let's just go
Exactly.
through a basic P&L accounting statement on how it comes up with your gross margin and your cost of goods sold. So let's just say this is a store that does $1 million in sales, and this is a fictitious end of year statement. So GAAP accounting principles calculates your cost of goods sold by taking your beginning inventory at cost, plus your purchases at cost of merchandise, less your ending inventory at cost. And that is how the calculation of cost of goods sold is come up with. In this case, we have $600,000 cost of goods sold for the year. We take the sales less the cost of goods sold. We have your gross profit of $400,000. We take the gross profit, we take the expenses, payroll, rent, advertising, credit card costs, travel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And voila, this retailer made $50,000 net profit, which is all taxable.
Exactly.
Now
That's what the
let's look at this a different way.
that's what the IRS is interested in, is how much are
That's
they
what
going to
the
get?
IRS is interested in. And let's look at this differently, though, because let's take these same numbers, but let's track the cash and what they're saying, because it tells an entirely different picture of this retailer that is showing making money. I want to tell a quick story before we go forward. Many, many years ago, when I was starting as a retail consultant, I got a new client, and the son was taking over the business from the father, and the father was retiring. And he came to me and he goes, I want you to help my son because this business is getting tougher and tougher and tougher. I remember when I had owned the business, we made so much money that I had to go to the bank and borrow money to pay just the taxes on all the profit I was making. And even though I was young, Nate, at the time, I thought, that doesn't sound right. Why would you need to get money to pay taxes on the money you made? This is how it happens. Because
Exactly.
in that same number, cash in and cash out, we bought $700,000 worth of merchandise. We had $350,000 worth of expenses. We sold $1 million, but our expenses were $1,050,000. This is the same store that made $50,000 that is now $100,000 variance between what they made and the cash deficit of 50. So where did the problem come in? And the problem came in terms of how much they bought. If you have $1 million store, why are you buying $700,000 worth of merchandise? And this is a really important thing because many retailers pay far too much in taxes because they do not understand this concept of ending inventories, how much they're buying, and how much they're going to be paying taxes on merchandise that hasn't sold yet.
Exactly.
You want to jump
So
in, Nate?
I think one of the elements, and Paul just broke apart, and hopefully it came across in terms of this core tenet of accounting, while it's quote unquote correct, it does mislead. And I think one of the elements is, are you connecting the decisions you're going to be making, especially ones around cash? How are you actually planning those out over time? And so one of the just common causes of that is failing to plan in the first place. Because if you're not planning for far enough out, and I touched on this earlier, if you're just solving for today's problems or this week's problems, you're going to be setting yourself up to miss the bigger picture. And so I think not taking into account the entirety of the financial aspect, which we'll talk about later, which is even how much should I be selling, right? Relative to what my business costs are. And it's not like costs are going down. And so keeping that into consideration, we see this time and time again being wide and thin in your inventory positions. I mean, that is not helping. That causes a variety of problems in the business. But perhaps most of all, it's not availing yourself of the actual insight and data that you have inside your business, and it causes you to not only lose money, which is the whole point of this conversation today, Paul, but it actually causes you to lose focus. And if you lose focus, how are you ever supposed to get ahead of the problem? And then you just stay on you stay on the treadmill of, again, trying to reorder, look at what SKU performance is, and it really makes it hard to get ahead of it, which is the whole point of, you are independent retailers. You can pivot, you can reinvent yourselves if you want to, but most importantly is you have an audience, you have a community, you have a group of people that you're curating taste for. And so being able to curate that more precisely and more quickly allows you to have a competitive advantage over just about everyone else, and being able to take advantage of opportunities.
Nate, wide and thin inventory positions. I actually had a retailer tell me last week that they thought that was where they wanted to be. And I said, well, with all due respect, you're setting yourself up for failure. What does that mean, wide and thin? What that means, and I think this comes down to this: a retailer wants to be everything to everybody, and that is absolutely impossible. And what happens with wide and thin inventories is you have an inventory position that within a matter of weeks becomes concave. In other words, you're going to be sitting with on the edges the sizes that don't sell, and all the sizes your customer wants and you're out of, and you're constantly walking people. And the second thing I just want to point out about this slide is the pivot. One of the things that I think great retailers do is they're quick to pivot. We have a client in Brooklyn, and it's two sisters who run the store. I'm not going to say who it is, but they're absolutely fantastic retailers. And I want to tell you something. When they know something's wrong, they do not hesitate to move. They pivot immediately. They decided about a year ago that they didn't want to be in vintage clothing anymore, and it was doing about three or $400,000 a year in sales. So it was not a small part of their business, but they looked at the margin, and they looked at the turns, and they looked at the sales per square foot within the store that was doing, and they decided, we want out of this business. We know what we're going to do. We're going to expand into toys, and they were out within 3 months. And right now, that three or $400,000 business they were doing in vintage is now a $700,000 toy business right now. And they did this all within 12 months. They did not hesitate to move. I do think that is a secret for really successful retailers.
Yeah, and stay tuned because Paul is going to go through a quick calculation to just even think about how to make a decision like that. And that's a little
Yep.
bit towards the end.
Yep.
So we mentioned opportunity, right? And so Paul's good friend, Albert Einstein, is famous for saying in the middle of every difficulty lies opportunity. But it's really true, and it's really one of the competitive advantages that independent retailers have. The way in which you're going to be able to actually do it, because you have a million other things to worry about, think about, is being able to make forward-looking decisions. Okay. And so being able to say, what is upcoming? Where do I want to end this season, start the next season? So much of the performance of any given season, change of trend, what have you, depending on which vertical you're in, is about what is your inventory at the start of that period. And if you haven't exited the previous one, you're not going to have the cash to start the next one. And you can't coordinate those two activities if you're not thinking about these buying cycles and the actual customer demand that's flowing across them. That's going to be really, really hard to do. Just winging it. And so finally, the final piece is you have to connect those cycles with the actual financial picture of the business. And when you don't do that, this is where cash crunches come in. And so, sure, if you have a hyper seasonal business, you're going to have to make advanced purchases. You're going to have to perhaps put deposits down. There are going to be periods in which you're investing in the inventory and then selling it down and selling through it later on. That absolutely happens. But that does not mean that you should be, sitting there every single year having to make the same struggle of not knowing whether you're gonna have to deposit more from your personal checking into the business account to make payroll.
Nate, I think sometimes retailers that do merchandise planning and make a good stab at merchandise planning leave out a whole part of their business, which is they leave out what exactly is their business goals are relative to cash flow, relative to margin, and relative to paying down their debt. And
Right.
true, what we call merchant inventory planning is really financial inventory planning. Because what we do is we want to take into consideration that particular retailer's goals, whatever they may be, and how are we going to accomplish them? And we're going to accomplish them by improving their cash flow so that they can pay down the debt. I had a meeting this morning with a great retailer and they're making money. But I found out that the business owes one of the owner's husband three or $400,000. And I said, what we need to do is, and they said, we just want to start paying him interest. And I said, let's build a plan so that you're not only be able to pay him interest, but let's build a plan so that we can get that money paid off within 3 to 4 years, which after looking
Exactly.
at their numbers, I believe they could do. But we're going to create a merchandise plan that takes that into consideration, not just simply merchandising, but you're taking your entire operation and your set of goals in. It's margin, it's payroll, it's rent, it's debt. And here is maybe the most important thing that we need to talk about today. And if you really want to improve your cash flow, you need to understand that you need to look at how you manage your inventory in all likelihood differently than what you're doing today. Because the common mistake that we see over and over and over again is that independent retailers hold too much inventory, which becomes age and becomes a cancer in their business. And because they hold too much inventory, they do not flow in enough new inventory, which is the lifeblood and is going to drive sales so that we can have sales increases to improve our cash flow. This is the common mistake that retailers make. And this is what retailers need to understand they need to fix. You can talk about cutting expenses till the cows come home or improving margin a point or two. But I can tell you that by just understanding this, we work with clients all the time, and it is not uncommon for clients that once they understand this concept, to start producing not just double digit sales increases, but 20, 30, 40% increases the first year in profitable sales when they understand and abide by this. Like, I can't say, Nate, how important this
Yep.
is for
Absolutely.
them. Look, you want new goods. If you take psychology in college, first week, what they will teach you is that As human beings, when we're being exposed to something new and novel, it increases this chemical called dopamine in our brain. And it's a neurotransmitter, and it's what people call the feel-good neurotransmitters. When we eat cake, when we have family over
Yep.
for holidays, when we go see a funny movie, when that's when dopamine is released in our brain. And when we see something new as human beings, we do see it as the potential to reward us in some way. This is why when you walk into a really good retailer store, they will tell you that this has just arrived. They will tell you, come look at this, right? This just came in because the customer wants to see newness. And when we understand how absolutely critical this is to the success of a retail store, that's when we can start making changes. And it gets back down
Yep.
to the absolute psychology of our customer. So
And I
the
think,
finance,
yeah, Paul,
go
just
ahead, Nate.
I'm just looking at the time, and I think one of the
Yeah,
things that we want to jump into are some examples of how this manifests, in given the, given the dynamics of actually the numbers.
yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about this. Financial merchandise planning is consists of two distinct processes, and this is what people don't understand. Though different, they are two different sides of the very same coin. So I want to talk about this. The first step is budgeting your inventory purchases. This is where the cash flow comes in. So this is going to be a tutelage on how you need to start budgeting your inventory purchases accurately to have more sales and to improve your cash flow. So get a paper and pencil out. We can play along at home at this. But when we really start talking about when we talk about budgeting, we need to know how much are we going to sell. And so if we were Nate, if we were going to open up a new store, let's say we're going to open up a new store, and we want to sell $1 million in that store, but we where do we come up with the $1 million? Because the first thing we would do is get a know exactly projecting out how much rent's a key factor. Your rent should be 10% or less of your sales. Payroll is your other key factor. Payroll should be 20% or less to sales. These are generic numbers that you can use. Nobody's the same, but you can use these. And then everything else from advertising, credit card costs, travel, supplies, etc., roughly another 10% to sales. So once we know that this store is going to have $400,000 in expenses. We then plan $1 million in sales. Now, why would we plan $1 million in sales? Because in this business, we know that our gross profit is attainable at 50%. Every vertical is different, but let's just deal with women's boutiques for the moment. Women's boutiques, generally speaking, our goal is if you're a good buyer, it could be 52%, 53. If you're not so good buyer, 47, 48, but you're in the neighborhood of 50. So let's use
Right.
50% as our profit goal. Now, if we know that's our profit goal, then what's the other side of our profit? Our buying, it's our purchasing, it's our open to buy. So it's the reciprocal of our goal is our open to buy. It's as simple as that. This is open to buy 101. If we have $1 million store, we should be purchasing $500,000 at cost worth of merchandise. And because we want to maintain a 50% gross margin on sales, we'll sell it for double. We'll sell it for the $1 million. Okay? Very simple. All right. Now we take those expenses, which we thought were going to be 400,000, and subtract
Yep.
that from the purchases, and now we have, after everything is paid, $100,000 in free cash flow. You notice I didn't put profit because we talked about how profit can be misleading. But what's not misleading is the amount of money you have in your checking account at the end of the year after everything is paid for. And so this is
Exactly.
basically planning 101. Now, it doesn't, if your margin is higher or lower, that's going to be based on how much you buy. So, for example, and I'm going to get my thing. If you're in a business where, let's say, Paul, I can't get 50% margin, I can get 45% is my goal. Fine. So we're going to do $1 million. So if 45% is our gross margin goal, how much merchandise should we buy? Well, what's the reciprocal of 45? 55. We do 1 million times 55. Now we're going to buy a little bit more merchandise to get that $1 million because our margins are going to be tighter. We subtract the 40%, we still make money, but it's only 50,000. Well, I know I can get 52. I get great initial markup. I take my markdowns. We're going to talk about that in a second. And so I know I can get 52%, then I don't need to buy as much. So there my budget is 48%, or the $1 million store times 0.48, my open to buy is 480,000. I can sell 480,000 I can buy 480,000 and sell it for a million. I subtract my expenses, and wow, I have $120,000 free cash flow. Your open to buy is going to be based on individual verticals and also individual classifications within your store. For example, if you're a boutique, your jewelry margin is going to be a lot higher than possibly your denim. So that's going to that your open to buy budget as a percentage of sales will be different for jewelry than from denim. But here's what's
And
important.
I
Go
think
ahead.
also that's the whole point is that the mileage doesn't vary just in terms of what type of retailer that you are. It varies depending on the types of goods that you're actually selling within the store. And so there's this concept of you have a lot of mini businesses within the four walls of your store, or if you're e-com, within the different categories or classes within your store. Sorry, Paul.
That's no, that's fine. Glad you brought that because that's the whole point of classification merchandising. Because you have different businesses within your store, they have to be treated and tracked and planned separately. But what we find is that what retailers will do in almost a knee-jerk, pessimistic fashion is my cash flow is bad, so I think I'm going to stop buying as much merchandise. And this is the road to ruin. I can tell you this because what you're doing then is I'm going to have less new, which is what the customers want to buy. I'm going to have less of that. Let's think about that for a second. I'm going to cut my purchases, so I'm going to have less of what the consumer wants, and that means I'm going to sell less, and that's going to improve my cash flow. That's not, it's going to actually make it worse. Your profitable sales are going to shrink. But, I live in Minnesota and the landlords here, Nate, are really nice people. If you have a store in Minnesota, because we're all good Norwegian Lutherans, that if your sales go down 20%, the landlord immediately cuts your rent by 20%. Isn't that
Yeah,
amazing?
I wish
Well,
that
that's a
were the,
lie
yeah.
because landlords, nobody does that. If your sales are down 20%, they don't care. Pay me my rent. So you can fire grandma and you can fire your payroll and you can advertise less, which all has the potential to be detrimental to your business. And so what if we decided to go down to 350,000? We're gonna buy less merchandise. Well, at 50% margin, how much would we then sell logically? Well, we'd sell 700,000. If you buy 350 and you have a 50% margin, your sales are going to go to 700. Remember, our expenses were 400. That's not going to change too much. And so now suddenly we've got 750 out and 700 in, and we've got a $50,000 cash deficit because reducing purchases is not the answer unless you are a drunken sailor overbuying, which we have very few of those today in our country. Most retailers
Yep.
that we walk into are more worried about the economy, which they shouldn't be. We shouldn't talk about global things. It's all about, Nate talks about this very articulately, but we should worry about our own business. And when you do this, you are driving a stake into the heart of your business. This is not how to fix things. So let me tell you part of the solution to this. Paul, I buy 500,000. Who says I'm going to sell a million? What if I don't sell a million? What if my sales aren't quite what they're supposed to be? Well, that's why God invented markdowns. Because markdowns in a retail store are not a zero-sum game. Somebody wins, somebody loses. No, it's a positive sum game. Everybody explain why.
Right.
Customers
Oops.
get the cash back, you can receive something else that will sell better. That's a win-win. Markdowns are not the problem in your store. They're a tool to solve a problem in your store. This is an important thing to
Exactly.
understand. So how do we determine how much markdowns most retailers don't appreciate the markdown budget. So let's just talk about what we would do in terms of a mark. Let's take that same $1 million store, Nate. So we said we're gonna buy $500,000 in cost and we're gonna sell it for a million, right? but that's not what we're going to market at. Let's say in this store, we've got an IMU, our initial markup is 2.5. 2.5 is 60% of the retail price is markup. So let's just say that's where we mark goods up initially. So we spend 500,000, we don't market a million, that's what we're going to sell it. We market 1.25 million. We sell it for a million, and lo and behold, guess how many markdowns we can take to continue to drive sales so that we keep making that sales plan. We pivot, getting back to pivoting. We react quickly, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. We've got $250,000 to mark down. So let's
Yeah.
use the money.
And the biggest, the initial markup, that's your ceiling on what you're going to make on that product. And the key difference between, realizing that and not is what Paul talked about, the fresh goods. If you have fresh goods, then you can actually realize full price. And if you are thinking that you want to hold things, forever to earn that full price, you're making it very, very difficult for yourself, and you're not actually allowing yourself to be a merchant. You're in the storage business, not in the moving business.
So just like anything else in life, we've got rules around markdowns. The first thing is we just talked about it. Have a plan. How many we can take, right? Have an idea. Let's solve that problem. Am I taking too many? Maybe I'm not taking enough. Let's have a budget. And let's have a budget. And that's not a typo, Nate. Have a
Yep.
budget and don't be under. I meant that, by the way. Okay, if you're going to make a mistake on markdowns, I want you to make a mistake that you sold it too fast and you marked it down too much. That's a way better thing than I want to play. I know I'm going to lose money, you know? And so you take a little markdown and it doesn't sell. And then you take another markdown and it doesn't sell. And pretty soon, every week, every month it sits there, it depreciates and gets worse. Now you've got a tag that's got 4 different markdown prices on it. That's the horror story of horror stories in retail. Use a budget and don't be under. This gets back to your first markdown's the cheapest. That adage is an important adage. And what it means is make that markdown work. Sell it for the price it's going to sell immediately. And so don't worry about making money. Now you worry about cash flow, getting it out of the
Yep.
store so that because you're going to be buying this 500,000, you've got a lot more new merchandise, right? Flowing in, which is going to drive
Well, that's
sales.
the
So you got to
whole,
get it out.
exactly. That's the whole point is you want those dollars back in so you can keep flowing in and have another shot, which is the whole point of these next two
That's it.
points.
That that's it. Now, look, I'm not saying markdowns are not an expense. They are an expense. But like anything else, we need to learn from them. There's an old adage that success teaches us nothing, failure teaches us everything in life. Markdowns are failure. So learn from every markdown you take and pay the tuition. Just don't do it again. That gets back to another, I think, Albert Einstein quote. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. So learn from it. If it didn't sell because it was too expensive, they don't like the color yellow, it was too young, it was too old, it was ugly. Okay, made the mistake, but let's learn from it and let's go forward. Now, number two, and this is really important, and I put avoiding the kiss of death. A really good retailer told me this just a few months ago. He was explaining to another retailer about why he's got to get inventory in and out of the store. And he said, because I want to avoid the kiss of death. The kiss of death, carrying too much inventory. This is different than the budget. The budget is cash flow. This is making sure that we make the sales plan. The longer you
Yep.
hold on to inventory, the less likely it is to sell. So again, it gets back again to that word pivot, right, Nate? So
Exactly.
I cannot emphasize this enough, guys. Old inventory in your store, you think it's not consequential. It is. It robs you. It robs you of sales. It robs you of cash flow. And it robs you, more importantly, of your potential of what you could do because you ignore it. And when you ignore when you ignore inventory that's aged, what happens is it metastasizes like a cancer throughout your business. It affects your retail sales because the customer, what do they want? What's new? Well, that's not new, but it'll sell one day, And so I want to see it on sale. Well, I haven't even put it on sale yet because it'll sell one day. You are hurting your business far more than you can ever appreciate. So
And
how do we?
and yeah, I think even on that, Paul, is the ultimate irony is holding on to aged inventory prevents you from actually buying more that's going to be moving.
Exactly. That's
And
exactly
that's
right.
the key to this game,
That's the
is you
key.
actually
That's the
want to be
absolute
buying
key. Thank you.
more just
Right.
in the correct flow.
Yes, because I can't buy more because I've got all this stuff sitting here. Well, this stuff sitting is not going to sell. So you are killing your business. So how do we determine it? Depends on your retail vertical, and it depends also on classifications within a retail vertical. But if we just take boutique business in general, the optimum holding inventory positions are based on time. It doesn't matter what type of retailer you are. What is the shelf life for that business, and how quickly can we get back into inventory? And so in the boutique business, we believe that a 10-week supply is optimum. We believe that, so if a 10-week supply, if you take that divided by the 52 divided by your week supply, you need to get about a 5.2 turn. Now, what does that mean? We'll just use 5 turns. It's easier to calc, right? So
Right.
let's take that same store. Okay, we're opening the store for $1 million, right? We're going to buy 500,000 for the year. Obviously, we're not going to buy it all at one fell swoop, but we're going to have we got $250,000 down budget. We got a $500,000 inventory budget, but that doesn't tell us how much should be on the floor. How much should be on the floor on the average? Because we've got to turn it. That's everything.
Yep.
So if we do 5 turns, that's calculated by just simply taking your planned sales for the year, dividing it by your turn rate, and we should keep in this store about 200,000, $1 million annual sales divided by 5. We're going to sell that $200,000 retail inventory 5 times every 10 weeks. Now let's turn it into cost because we want to maintain 50%. Our average position at cost will be $100,000. So we sit on the average. Now, some months, we're going to have more than that. If you're a boutique,
For
May, you're going to
sure.
have more than that.
There are
October, September, you're going
seasons.
to have more than that. January, not as much. So this is not a static number, right? It flows up and down based on customer demand. But we need to know this because we've got to be able to replace the inventory often. Now, again, as we were talking about, this financial structure that we're talking about, the budget around the reciprocal of your margin against planned sales by classification, they're going to be different. The turn factor based on holding inventory, the second part of the coin, right? That's based on time and how fast we want to get in and out of inventory. Each classification in your business is going to be a little bit different. Let we use jewelry, for example, Nate, as an example. Jewelry, you
Yep.
can probably get more margin in, but jewelry is kind of subjective for the customer, and so it doesn't turn quite as fast. So you
Exactly.
get more margin, but you probably want to replace the inventory not every 10 weeks, maybe every 3 or 4 months. So you plan that a little bit differently. But this is when you do this, when you're zeroed in on where your business should be, this is how you grow your business. Every classification is a little mini store. And again, footwear sells differently than skis and apparel, bikes, etc. A lot of people come to us and go, I want to do my open to buy by vendor. And the reason why they do that is because they buy by vendor. But that's not how
Right.
the customer buys, unless it's a really well-known name like Nike. Customer comes in and goes, I'm looking for a pair of Nikes. They mean Nike, by the way, they do. Then you should probably have an open to buy by vendor. But mostly vendors change all the time. And it's very, very difficult to plan by vendor. It's every major retailer on the planet has open to buy by classification, not necessarily by vendor.
Well, I think it's also what do you actually solve? What decision are you trying to make? And usually, when people are saying they want to do it by vendor, what they're saying is, "I'm just trying to make the ordering process easier." That is
Yeah.
not actually thinking ahead and planning about the time element. And frankly, unless you have a vendor that drives a category, there are other B and C vendors that especially and this is a separate conversation, but when you have supply constraints, you want to actually be able to pivot between those other vendors in that same category and allow them to surprise you. We have plenty of retailers we work with whose B and C vendors are now their A vendors. And they allowed themselves to actually be surprised the upside. And so I think one of the elements here is you want to set yourself up to actually make decisions based upon data. And that doesn't mean that, you know, software or your point of sale or anything else is the strategy. What you want to do is you want to actually have this as, how are you helping yourself make decisions? And I think one of the key elements to whether or not you're making a good decision is, are you setting yourself up, the reports you're watching, are they helping you make a decision? And in what time frame are they helping you make a decision? And so what are the key ones you're watching on a daily basis, on a weekly basis? And then how are you doing your review at the end of the month? And that's one of the problems with skew replenishment is it forces you to, sort of look through the forest through the trees, or lose the forest through the trees, because you're so narrowly focused in on the individual skews, you've lost the bigger picture. And that's really, really important to maintain an eye towards the bigger picture as well as, managing the day to day. And that's the trick of being an owner, is that you have to manage both of those things simultaneously.
I love that analogy, Nate, because listen, I believe one of the most important things in retail is to make sure that you are replenished in stock of wanted, known items that are replenishable, basic core items. Being out of stock is the original sin, quite frankly, in retail. So it's very, very important. The problem, as you say, is that you are dealing with individual trees and you're pruning the individual tree, but you've never gotten up in the helicopter and looked at the whole forest. And the whole forest, you've got half the forest is not doing well at all. And so that's the problem with replenishment. It's just dealing with certain items. So that's a very, very good point.
And so I think
So
one of the things you can be doing, today immediately is identifying where is, as Paul very colorfully puts it, the cancer in the store. Where is the aged inventory? I guarantee you, if it didn't sell this season, packing it up and saving it for next year is probably not going to be a winning strategy. And frankly, it's robbing the rest of, the freshness of the rest of the store. And so being able to run a clearance sale using tools like Max Retail for branded goods to actually get it out of, to be able to get it out of the store, and being able to, as Paul and I have been talking about, looking at the store by classification allows you to find the pockets of opportunity and the pockets of stagnation and start to shift the dollars from the places of stagnation to the places that are growing. And I don't know about you, Paul, but in every store I look at, there's always a place that there's growth and opportunity.
absolutely. And I think this all gets around to, I think, a general fact about retailers in general. And that's why I love retailers. In fact, I was one. Um, is that we're all optimists by nature. We all think that that room full of horsemen, or there's got to be a pony around here somewhere. And so when we're at a cocktail party, the conversations usually with our fellow retailers is, "What are you selling? Oh, I just put this line in. It's blowing out. Are you selling this category? I can't get enough of jelly cats." I mean, whatever it is, we're talking about what's good, and so we push everything that's not necessarily good or bad off to the side, and that is part of the problem. We have to have an adherence to not just what is selling, but what isn't selling, and be very, very willing to pivot and aggressively get rid of it. Now, how do you determine that? So
Yeah,
I'll
I would
tell you a
say is
quick
Paul,
story.
we probably need to wrap up to get to questions the next 2 to 3 minutes because we're running out
Okay,
of
we're going to
time.
go real quick here. We're going to talk about stock to sales ratios, and then we're going to open it up to questions. Okay.
Great.
So stock to sales ratios, I think, do not get shrift here for a lot of retailers because they talk about what are key metrics. Well, I can tell you the most important metric that you need to look at in your business in terms of inventory is how much sales it's producing. It's called a stock to sales ratio, and it's more significant in margin. I learned this from Warren Buffett when I had one of his companies as a client of mine. It was a shoe company out of New England. And when Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway bought them, they threw away all their bonus plans because they didn't take into consideration inventory. It was just profits. Warren Buffett's a great investor. He needs to look at capital investment and risk. So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to do this real quick and then we're going to open it up. So let's take vendor A and vendor B in your store. Last month, vendor A did $3,000 in business with $1,500 in and gross margin, 50%. Vendor B did the same amount of business, but 45% gross margin, 1350. If you are looking at simply profitability and not looking at anything else, vendor A wins. You did the same amount of business with a slightly higher profit. Vendor A is more profitable. But let's say your stock to sales ratio in vendor A that month was 9-1 and vendor B 3-1. In other words, 9-1 would mean of those $3,000 in sales, we had 9 times or $27,000 in inventory. Vendor B did the same amount of sales, but 3 times the inventory, 9,000. I'm just going to show you how that compares. So in vendor A, we made $150 more, right? But
Yep.
we had $18,000 more of our money tied up for 150 bucks. Is
And
that
I think that's why it's so dangerous to just look at the first example of cost of goods sold, right? Because if you're not taking into consideration how much you're actually having to commit and putting out in dollars, you can get misled by exactly this dynamic.
That's exactly right. So let's open it up. Let's go to the Q&A and let's, if people have, there are no dumb questions.
Yep. So we have, I think Celeste, we had a couple of questions, right?
We did. Thank you, everybody. Our Q&A section is starting to fill up. We have a lot of questions out there, Paul and Nate, about when is the right time to take a markdown and how deep should that first markdown be?
Can I jump on that one, Nate?
No,
So
please.
there are metrics and formulas and all kinds of stuff you can read about in financial merchandising. This one, there are none that made, it's never made any sense to me whatsoever. The idea of markdowns, when to take them is easier, how much is different. That is going to be your feel. You have to, the key to how much you should mark something down is what is the price that's going to move it right away. What price? Don't, if you have a dress for $120 and it didn't sell at $120, guess what? $109.99 is not going to move it, and probably $99 isn't going to move it. So you've got to find that price that's going to get it off the shelf and get it into somebody's bag and the money into your cash register as quickly as possible. Because it's not about making profit, it's about making cash quickly because you've got a whole flow, right? Let's talk about our $1 million store. You have $500,000 coming in. We got more stuff coming in. We got a cash flow. Make that first markdown work. Now, when to take a markdown is also a little tricky. I live in Minnesota. You know, believe it or not, we've had snowstorms in Minnesota in the middle of April. We've had 2 feet of snow here. Pretty hard to sell summer dresses in Minnesota if you have a snowstorm there in April. So,
Exactly.
or sweaters if it's 90 degrees in October. Weather is a huge factor. So you have to take that into consideration. Has it had enough time on the sales floor to really sell? Once you've made that decision that it has, and you know in your gut it's wrong, by the way. A good retailer, when it comes out of the box, go, row, that's my Scooby-Doo impersonation. It could be a problem. And so you give it a chance, you move it around the store, you try different things to sell it, but at some point you know in your gut it's wrong, then you move on it immediately. This gets back to maybe Nate, I think, as a key word in this whole presentation, which is pivot. Pivot quickly.
Exactly.
And then Paul, as a follow-up to that question, Betsy says, what if I do all that and I run the clearance and I have a drastic price cut and the merchandise still isn't gone? What does she do then?
I think this is where the devil's in the
Go ahead.
details, right? And so I think, Paul, in our experience, and you've seen obviously a few more of these instances than I have, but the devil's in the details of what you're actually doing and running the clearance, right? So are you putting, like a little sign on it? I mean, even little things like, is it percentage off versus dollars off? Are you segregating it? Are you doing an event around it? I mean, these are all very, very, the rules start to break down when you look at sort of the actual implementation. And so I think that's actually a good call out. Maybe Paul, you can look at the next slide. So people, if you have very specific questions around that, that's a good opportunity to reach out to us and talk to us because that's a nuance where we could probably diagnose exactly where things might might have gone off track.
Like at this moment to bring up Jerry Hinkemeyer. I know Celeste has been wondering when Jerry Hinkemeyer's name would be coming up on this presentation. Jerry Hinkemeyer had a store in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And one day I drove up to his store, and it was July. And when I walked in, he had a little tiny sale sign, and it said sale, which I hate that word anyway, in the little corner of the door. And that was it. I walk in, everything's marked half off. And I asked Jerry, how's the sale going? He goes, terrible. He goes, nobody's coming in the store. And look, I've got everything marked half off. Should I go further down? And then he goes, and look at Dress Barn. I think it was a Dress Barn across the mall. They're full of customers and people are, and they're, my wife went into Dress Barn and she said, most of the stuff, Jerry, was 20 and 30% off. They had a clown out there. They were selling popcorn. They had red and white and blue banners. They said inventory clearance liquidation, nothing held back. It's exactly what you said, Nate. How you do it is how you get rid of inventory. It's hype. I think what we should do is we could do a whole presentation, Nate, on this in terms of
Again,
how you get rid of merchandise. And maybe that's our next webinar.
exactly.
Paul, I have another question. Can you explain the breakdown of what expenses should be within my store?
So everybody's a little bit different. But we did a poll, and actually, Nate, you requested this poll. We did a poll about a year ago, I think it was, Nate, a year and a half ago, where we polled, and it was several hundred of our clients' boutiques that we all had financial information on. Now, this was in the women's boutique business, but the numbers I used in this presentation were very close to what we were seeing in our clients. 20% payroll, that includes yourself, and make sure if you're on a draw, you got to remember the draw doesn't show up on your P&L. It shows up on your balance sheet. But you got to include that in there. 20% overall, 10% rent or less, and then everything else should be 10, 12%. That's where you want to keep these. Now, you may be paying 4% rent, and you can pay a little bit more on payroll because of that, or more in advertising to get people in. But those are the general rules. If you look at your expenses, it's essentially just two line items that are meaningful. Payroll, which generally can be half of your expenses, and then rent
Right.
after that. And everything
Yeah, and
else
I think
is just miscellaneous stuff.
yeah, and I think it's really, really important. We opened up this presentation with a poll. I mean, so the vast majority, 85% of people were either in a cash crunch or didn't know how often they would be in one. And so I think as we're wrapping up here, and I apologize that we're going to stick around for a few more minutes to answer remaining questions, but it's just so, so important to think about these things and to plan ahead. And I was scanning some of the other questions about, well, what if my unique circumstance? I have to tell you folks, we've worked with thousands of retail stores. These principles apply to them all. I hate to break it to you, but it is very unlikely you've come up with a new format of retail that these tenets do not apply. And so even if you have to do 6 months out purchasing, which is extremely common in a lot of our verticals, these tenets still hold. And if you're going to have to hold on to inventory, you better be making very good margin on it, because it all comes back down to that slide about about Warren Buffett. Are you making a return on your investment, right? And the difference between an investment of in the stock market like Warren Buffett does and what you do in your inventory in the retail game by and large does not get better with age. Okay. So that's really, really important to think about, is how are you planning this out and making sure you're availing yourself that. So
So let me
Celeste,
just say this, Nate.
go ahead, Paul.
Let me say this, Nate. It says book a strategy session. Do you know what retailers see when what they think when they see that? Oh, book a session where they're going to try to sell me on their service. Well, I don't want that, right? I just want to talk about this for just a second because I think it's very
Please.
important. We're not talking about a sales pitch on this. We are talking about giving you clarity about your business. If at that point you would be interested in hiring us, great. But the only way you're going to be interested in hiring us is if we show you exactly what needs to be done and a game plan to how to do it, and say you could do it on your own or you could hire us. But at least now you have what I think is one of the most important words in the English language after pivot. is clarity. You have clarity about your business that you can see this is exactly what needs to be done and exactly how we're going to do it. This is not a theory of management ones. In fact, we didn't invent this. This is something that has worked for ages for retail stores. Really, Zara, the most successful boutique in the history of mankind, they don't keep inventory more than 6 weeks. That after that, it's moved around the store every week. The windows are changed every week. They never reorder anything. It's about scarcity and about newness all the time. This is not anything we invented, but this is something that works. And we have success after success after success stories. So I want to urge you, don't hesitate thinking, I don't want some salesman trying to sell me anything. I would like to have someone look at my numbers and say, this is what needs to happen for me to get ahead and get this debt paid off, to make more money so I can pay myself a salary, or I can give myself a raise, or hire a manager, or give my manager, whatever it is your goals are. Let's talk about it, and we'll give you a plan to do it at no charge whatsoever.
Exactly. Well, thanks very much, everyone. I do want to just recognize the time. If you have to jump, we are going to stick around for a few more minutes to answer some remaining questions. But if you have to jump, totally understand it. We're going to send the recording out, so you'll have that as well. Again, there's a lot of individual questions as I'm scrolling through the actual Q&A that's live, as well as the ones that were sent ahead of time. So we apologize we couldn't get to all the questions, but that's the great opportunity. You can email Paul or myself, or you can book a session to actually go through your specific circumstances as well.
Nate, if you believe in miracles, we did this in just over an hour.
Yeah,
We have a lot to talk
exactly.
about.
I got nervous there. The
I
top
know you
third.
did.
Celeste, any other, I know we had a bunch of questions sent ahead, and they seem to be overlapping with some of the ones that are being asked live as well.
Right. I see questions out there about how do you plan for the tariffs, merchandise plan for the tariffs?
Yeah, so this, go ahead.
I'm going to jump in one quick piece of advice, and then I'll let you go, Nate, because I know you have a lot of thoughts on this, and Nate's a better person to answer this question than I. But I will tell you this: I feel that passing the increases onto your customers is easier said than done. And so I would do nothing to create friction on sales. Sales are everything in this business. So if increasing the price point, if you're marked at something $192 and the tariff would indicate to keep the same margin, you have to market 204, I would market 199. I would keep it under a psychological price point and work with a lower margin just to make sure that it does not create friction for sales. That's how I would generally do it in terms of pricing.
So on that, and Paul and I disagree frequently, but I think that this is an element of that's the thought process. What are you trying to solve for? Paul's trying to solve for sell-through, right? And so don't optimize for margin by really undermining sell-through is really the takeaway there. And I think I would say it a little differently, which is I just got done speaking with a dozen toy store retailers. So this is a very fresh example in my mind, which is they didn't want to mark up things because they said, oh, well, this is my standard way in which I mark things up. So I take the cost that I received, I apply a calculator to it, and that's what I'm going to put on my floor. I hate to break it to you, but that's not how your customers actually care about things, especially when those things are already getting marked up. The landed goods may already having the price increase does not apply to what your landed cost was for things that didn't have a tariff attached to it. And so people don't, your shoppers do not care about your costs, and that cuts both ways. So I want to make sure that people are thoughtful around how do you optimize both the sell-through and the margin. There are plenty of circumstances where you can pass that on right now, even if there is no tariff attached to it. There's also plenty of circumstances, as Paul, gave, is that there's actually detrimental effects to that. And so different verticals will have different circumstances, will have different, you're going to be restricted by what your vendors say you can set it for. Like, these are all nuances that, again, I can't cover all of this in one answer, but this is the point of reach out. We can have a conversation about it. It's also with tariffs. Please do not spend all of your time and energy thinking about tariffs. You have a business to run. Your business is going to be here after the tariffs normalize. And so being able to think about how to, yes, get through this first wave of tariff, but then what, right? COVID happened, and a lot of people got through and even did really well after that. And so don't sacrifice what you are doing for the immediate term. Don't sacrifice your attention for only the immediate term. And I'd say the final thing on tariff is also, this is why it's so important to think about things on a class level, is that you may sacrifice margin on some items in a class while optimizing the margin on others. So the blended actual margin for that class didn't change. And that's really, really important in terms of, again, optimizing around sell-through and margin. Sorry, that was a long one.
We also have a few questions about how do you promote what are some ideas to promote a sale or a clearance or markdowns? And then Amy is chiming in and saying, Paul, bag sale, bag sale.
Amy, thank you, Amy. And I'm going to see you in 2 weeks, by the way. So I hope you're excited. We should have Amy on here to talk about her bag sale.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think, look, I think it's the Jerry Hinkemeyer thing. You've got whatever you do, it's got to be loud and proud and with bright signs. Red captures the attention on a sale more than any other color if you're into the psychology of color and price. But overall, it should not be subtle, and you should have it. Clearance sales and liquidation sales are like going to the dentist. You don't like doing it, but you have to do it, and you want to get out of there as fast as you can. So they have to be on a very short-term basis, maybe 2 weeks, and then it's over. But everything should be priced. Everything, Nate mentioned this a little bit earlier on clearance pricing. Everything should be sized. Everything should be put on a price point, because what has been proven over and over again, more and more retailers are doing this, is that percentage off doesn't work anymore. And so tell the customers respond to a known amount much better than a percentage off. So everything on that rack, $19.99, $29.99, $39.99, size, make it easy for the customer to buy. That's how you do a successful sale.
I think with that, it's 10 past. We're gonna have to leave now, but really appreciate everyone taking the time. I mean, we were really surprised with the attendance and the energy, and these are fantastic questions that are coming across. Please reach out to us. It's so important to us that we can be helpful to the independent retail community, to be able to help specialty retailers really work through these problems. I mean, this is the number one reason for burnout in retail, is not being able to be financially sustainable. So it's really, really important to us. And I think the attendance today showed that it's really important to all of you. We're going to send a survey out so we can do better next time. If you have suggestions, we'd love to hear them. Paul and I would love additional ideas for topics to talk about, but I think helping break down even this concept, I think there's more to do based on the questions we're getting. There's more to do, more to explain, so that people can, again, have what Paul talked about, the clarity. It's really, really important that when you're building the process of inventory buying, you have clarity into your business. And that clarity doesn't mean that it automatically is all roses. It just makes it more clear as to what the problems are and what the opportunities are. And you can solve the problems and maximize the opportunities. So with that, Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Celeste. And thank you all for taking the time.
Okay. There's going to be a poll that's going to pop up for those of you that are left. If you just take a few seconds and answer, we would really, really appreciate your feedback. Everyone, have a great rest of your day.